Hi, this lesson's about dominant seventh, or bingo chords. We talk about bingo chords. We also have a little brief introduction to diatonic harmony, which is one of the most important things that we're going to get to. But we'll start out talking about that there's three classes of chords. There's major, there's minor, and then the third is dominant. So I want to get used to those three sounds. And those are three totally different sounds, totally different parts. They always teach it like this, and I hate it because it doesn't sound right. There's C major, there's C minor, and there's C7. But to hear it better would be to hear G major, A minor, and D7. That gives you the character a little better in a musical context. We're going to give you a little introduction about diatonic harmony at the beginning, but then we'll get more into this. I'm not going to go all the way into it. What diatonic harmony is that for each note of the major scale, which you know, it's a G major scale, for each note there's a corresponding chord, and that chord may be either major, minor, or dominant. And there's one exception, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But major, minor, or dominant, and that's called diatonic harmony. And a whole bunch of songs and a whole bunch of chord progressions will follow that, and it will always sound good. A lot of songs and parts of songs don't. They either change key or they do some non-diatonic chords. But once you get this, it will really help. Diatonic harmony. So corresponding chords would be major, minor, minor, major, dominant, minor. It's actually half diminished, but let's ignore it for right now. So we're going to learn all of that later and get into it in the next lesson, all about it. But I just want to introduce the concept, make sure you understand what we were talking about when we talked about diatonic harmony. We're going to talk about two little aspects of it in today's lesson, but there it is. And that's when you get into the 1-6-2-5 or 1-6-4-5 stuff. 1-6 is minor, 4. And one of the great things that you gain is someone you can go to a jam, someone can say, it's just a 1-6-2-5, and then you know the song. It also will help you learn parts of songs, remember it, all of that stuff. Okay, I just wanted to get that part. Here are the only two things I'm going to teach you about it for today that I want you to get. This first concept is the relative minor. For every major chord, if it's the key center, like G, the sixth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is 3 steps down, is the relative minor chord. So for any chord, major, if we're in the G major, it's the key center, G major, 3 steps down, in this case E minor, is the relative minor. E minor is the relative minor of G major. For C, and you've heard this 10 million times, C down to A minor. That's a little piece of diatonic harmony, but it's really important for all kinds of other reasons that we're going to get to. But major chord, 3 steps down, in this case A minor, is the relative minor. And, here's the important flip-flop part, any minor key, there are songs in minor keys. Simple, man. A song in a minor key, that key of A minor is the same key as C major. It uses the same chords and it has the same scale. We'll get to all the implications of that with diatonic harmony. Just know there are songs in a minor key, like A minor or E minor, and then it is the same E minor key, or it uses the same chords in the same scale, but it's not the same. A minor key is relative to its relative major, which is up 3. Got it? Any chord. B minor. And we're allowed to talk about the note names when we're talking about chords and diatonic harmony, because you need to know that down 3, we're not just talking about where the note is, so we're not just talking about scale degrees, but we are allowed, if I talk about what's the relative minor of D, it's B minor. Any questions? Good. The next thing, which we're going to talk about, the other piece of diatonic harmony we're talking about, is really more about the chord that we're all talking about today, which is dominant chords. That's G7, the cowboy version. One of the things you want to know, the diatonic harmony piece of it, is in much harmony, and one of the more often times you will ever see a dominant chord, a bingo chord, D7, B7, C9, all those, a dominant chord is as the 5th. So there's the cowboy version of D7 also. It's often the 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In fact, in standard diatonic harmony, that's the only one that's the 5th. There's a huge exception that I'll tell you in 2 seconds. So, the chord we're going to talk about a lot now, today, is this dominant 7, G7. It has the dominant sound, a bluesy sound. It also has some tension. So if you listen to, here's the D7, it begs to resolve to G. One of the things you want to listen to in all of music, with all chords, and even all parts of melody, but with chords especially, is when is there tension and when is the tension released. Tension, dissonance, resolution. And sometimes there's too much of it. This is just a little bit too much. So sometimes, if you do it if you put it in another context, it's not, and in different voicing, it's not quite so dissonant. I'm really just talking about the use of the 7th chord right now. So if I'm in G, if I go from A minor, that's not quite so tense and not quite so much begging for resolution, even though it does resolve. You hear that? It's A minor to D, 7th, and I'm using different voicing to G. Doesn't sound so bad. Got it? Now let's look at the chords and the way we form them. Look deep inside the chord. It's in your handout. The 7th chord is formed. I'll get into the meat of it. There's a G major using the E bar form. And it's formed by giving you the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and the flat 7th. That note. So we take that G, that root, and move it down a whole step. And we do that by lifting the pinky. Make sense? So it's in this case, it's the 1st, the 5th, the flat 7th, the 3rd, the 5th, excuse me, 3rd, the 5th, and the root again. Questions? Good. Here's the C form, the A form of C. And then we do the exact same thing. We lift this 2nd root, the octave root. There's the C, there's the other C. We're going to lift the finger so it goes onto the bar. So we get note. I generally don't play the low E string and the high E string. The high one's not so bad. So that is C7. When you see the chord, now that it's technical, C7, a bingo chord, C7, D7, no other word in there, it means the dominant 7th, and it means we added the flat 7th. That's the root, that's the 7th, that's the flat 7th. Questions, comments, concerns? Good. Okay, now, this is one of the first times I'm going to show you a new chord form or a different chord form. And we don't like to do that too much, like to do familiar things, but this is another way to play the 7th chord that's very useful and it's not so weird, and you will learn it. That's an E7. It's on your form too. Now, if I do it, it's a movable shape if you don't play the top and bottom strings. That's D7, and I'm muting the top and bottom strings. Used commonly with E because then you can. Little Creedence Clearwater Revival action there. It's a very, very useful chord form. What it actually is the C shape. It's the C shape of E, and then changed, modified to be E7. So let's look at that. Here's a C. How I do chord forms and move them up is I play it without my, that's a C played without my index finger, and then I slide it up. That's using that as the bar chord. So that is the C shape of E major. I would almost never play that unless I was changing it some way. But that's the C form. 1st, 3rd, root, 3rd, excuse me, yeah, 3rd, excuse me, 1st, root, 5th, 3rd, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 5th, 3rd, root. That note is the 5th. Here's the 6th, here's the flat 7, here's the 7th, and here's the root. Root, so that's the flat 7. So it's a C form, and we take that 5th, move it up to 6th, flat 7th, right there. We'll be using this a lot more, this form. With the root on the 2nd string, this is the cooler way. And I want you to notice how it sounds better. This is D. Note, that's D7, but that's the highest note, so it sounds super tense and ready to resolve. But that D sounds a lot better, because the highest note is actually the root. So it doesn't quite sound like it needs to go somewhere else. So, we have this form, the E form, the A form, and the C form. Questions or comments? Good. Focus always on the 7th. It's the true 7th. Excuse me, it's the flat 7th. I'll let you figure out all the cowboy chord versions, which you know, but figure out why. That's an E7, that's an E7, and that's an A7, and that's a D7. Let you figure out what note changed. Always just, any cowboy chord you try and figure out, do the major one, do that one, then ask me, do the 7th and figure out what changed. That's what changed. Questions, comments, concerns? All right, here's one bonus version. Since that's the E form, that's obviously, and you probably already know it, E7. There's another bonus way to play it. It's just don't say altered, because altered means something different. That's another and very cool way to play the E7th chord. That is an E7th because on this string we've changed that root note so that is an E7th. But on this, which is the B string, right, which is giving me a 5th, if you put that note there, again 5th, 6th, 7th, right there. We're replacing that 5th with another 7th. And it sounds very cool. And it's used in songs. A lot of blues, a lot of blues, a lot of rock. Sounds cool. Okay, be remiss if I didn't mention it. So you know when we talked about diatonic harmony and we talked about 7th chords and harmony and their use in songs. In diatonic harmony and in bass, just think of that as like a standard harmony. It doesn't do anything interesting if you're staying in one key. All those songs. The dominant chord, regular dominant chord, like D7th if we're in G, is the only place you'll see a dominant chord. In blues and in blues-based rock, they use the dominant chord for all the chords. That's how it works. So blues, if someone says blues in G, they mean G in 7th. So blues-based rock, you'll see it all over rock and bop, stuff that has anything to do with blues. They're throwing the harmony out the window, and they just used dominant chords for everything, including the root. Confusing? Good. Conversely, in the country tradition and Irish tradition, in the country tradition, they don't use the dominant chord. And you'll see 10 million songs where they just don't bother. So if you're in G, when they go to the fifth, they just do a D. So they don't bother. That's why all your cowboy chord songs that you learned at first, they don't have no seventh chords. And that's why you'll see in a lot of songs that sometimes they'll do the fifth, like the D if we're in G, or the D if we're in G. They'll use a regular one, and sometimes they use a D major, and sometimes use a D7. It's something else you can do and to color it. It sounds slightly different. If we're in C, the G is your fifth. So the use of G, it's serving the same function. It's the fifth. It's dominant in terms of the tonic, in terms of it's giving us tension, and it resolves. It's another way to tone down the tension of the fifth. Question or comments?